Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? I hope some of y'all have checked out that group Mute out of Hamburg. Again, they're not like jazz, really. They're techno meets marching band, but it's really cool. A lot of the same instruments are being used, and actually, it can kind of give you some insight into how the early days of jazz was taking instruments from the European marching bands and classical instruments, and what they do with them in jazz is special. And there are some correlations too between swing and modern dance music. And so some of the repetitious parts that you hear these guys playing, there's swing songs that Ellen can be like, "Ah, that's dope." Basically, like, yeah, that's killer. So it's a really interesting cross section and kind of takes a century worth of music and condenses it into this thing that's kind of new and fresh. I've been watching it quite a lot. Their concerts on the rooftop from 2020, 2021 are both outstanding. And some of the other songs that they do, cover songs, reinterpret them, are really cool. It's really cool stuff. I find it really compelling to watch. I wish I had some good footage of some of the great swing bands to sit back and watch up close like this, not just the group from a distance, but like cameras kind of going through the band and getting to kind of get a real feel for which each guy's doing and which tone is whose. Watching a whole big band from a distance doesn't really give you that same. It's more of an ensemble thing. You don't really quite get the introspection as to who's doing what. But anyway, check out Mute if you haven't. I highly recommend it. I think it's really cool stuff. A great place to start would be that concert on the Philharmonic in Hamburg, the Elb Philharmon, however they say that in Germany. But today I'm going to do a little response to my contemporary episode. And I got a lot of comments, a lot of feedback on that episode, a lot of views. So that's great stuff right there. Appreciate everyone who gave me comments and feedback. It's quite clear to me that a large chunk of collectors today are really only buying new vinyl. And I find that somewhat surprising. Being a guy that's been buying vinyl for 30 years, during the dead years of the 90s, people were throwing it away basically. I bought a lot of great vinyl for really cheap. And there's this notion, I think, that vinyl doesn't sound good unless it's brand new. And it's just, I got records that are 50, 60 years old that sound immaculate. I've bought new records that have kicks in them and little chunks of stuff, impurities, imperfections. I got more new records that seem to have low quality and skip and just are pressed faulty. And this goes back to even buying new releases of stuff the last 15, 20 years. All hip hop, a lot of stuff was still put on vinyl, even though the resurgence seems so new. You were still buying Outkast new records in 1998 when Aquemini came out. I bought Pink Floyd Division Bell when it came out on the blue vinyl. So vinyl was still available for a lot of major releases. Certain genres were always on vinyl. Stuff DJs played always had vinyl 12 inches and stuff, and sometimes full-length albums. So it's not like vinyl didn't exist. And I feel like it's in this modern, condensed demand where presses are just churning stuff out to meet the demand. There's more imperfections probably now than there's ever been because it's not the main focus of record labels still to this day. In spite of its resurgence, digital streaming, that's what's happening. The albums are even kind of like a thing of the past again, like they were back in the 78 era and the 45 era. The singles were what drove sales and people download the song. The concept of an album, the unification of a series of tracks to make it feel like something. A lot of that seems to be missing from a lot of genres of music, probably less so in pop. In rock, but in pop, hip hop, a lot of the chart music, it's just driven by single, putting some guest on this record to sell my new single, and the albums are kind of afterthoughts. And so the record industry is not focused on record plants and building new pressing plants, and obviously there's a need for some new pressing plants because the backlog and demand is so high, but you want to go to any YouTube channel about these things, and the comments are like, "Oh yeah, I got my pressing and it was faulted and this and that." I hear the YouTube pages on jazz. You get all these comments about the mistakes they find on the records they got. the tone poets even. You know what I mean? Wrong label. You know what I mean? A side that had static noise. There's more bad pressings now than there's ever been, percentage-wise. And so this notion that we can't buy old records, and some people go, like the skip, this crackle, the crackles and the pops aren't necessarily inherent to a record's age. A lot of it's to deal with how it's handled, how much dust it's around. You know what I mean? There's just various factors that go into that. I got quiet records that were made in the 50s. And a lot of times those grooves from the 50s are deeper into that thicker vinyl, meaning that the needle's sinking deeper into the vinyl itself to amplify what's down in the groove, meaning the surface stuff is almost not present. And that's sometimes what the little hicks and crackles can be, is sometimes it kind of hitting some of that little surface stuff that's not in the music, it's just above the music. And to my ears, I've disassociated a lot of that. It's like a fireplace in the background. I don't even hear it. And so it's just weird to me that we've gotten to a place where most people who are collecting records today are just collecting new pressings, and the canon is going to be reshaped by this new definition of what's an artist's career. And that I always thought these were an addition to. You know, I'm still collecting the old stuff when I can find it. So what worries me is that people are going to get into some artists, Rollins, just some of the great jazz names, and they're going to know a couple records that were reissued, a few resonance and like those little indie labels that are reissuing live things, albums, and they're going to elevate that stuff to become part of their discography in a way, when that stuff's all addendums. It's all stuff that's been added on posthumously, and some of it has great value, some of it has minimal value, but because it's available in people's heads, they think it's this ascended part of the canon, and at the expense of a large chunk of a lot of these artists' careers. And that's, to me, the issue, is that if we're going to pay so much attention to Monk at Palo Alto, for example, which is a fine record, it's a nice documentation of that point of his career, but we're going to miss out on half his Riversides, some of his Prestige, and half his Columbias, and we're just going to know 4 records plus that. It's really changing the context. And I just think it's important that we don't abandon the guy's discography as it was released in the day. And if that means half it was only available on original pressings, I don't think we should not purchase them. Because the knowledge and the history demands of us that we know more than that. And a lot of these guys' records, you know, especially when you get into the more smaller artists, in terms of appeal and sales today, a lot of these guys are going to be represented by 1 or 2 titles in print. So to have a guy's career that had 20, 30, 40 albums being represented by 1 record or 2 records, I think the CD era had some of that same thing too, where people were collecting the discs. And I think a lot of stuff did make it on disc at one point or another. But the vinyl's nowhere near that point in sales, or in that point in availability, or even in the ability to produce it at that kind of level. So again, it's just interesting to me. It's different, not what I expected. Part of it is the issue that some of these old titles are really tough to find. But a lot of people do seem really afraid to buy used on eBay or Discogs. And I guess that's also somewhat surprising to me. eBay, you have the strength of feedback, the strength of a seller's reviews to go by. Discogs, kind of the same thing. It's not quite the crapshoot you think it is, you know. And I'll be quite honest with you, from my perspective, most things that are graded VG or VG plus won't have any sound issues. Those things that they're talking about, those scuffs and paper marks, won't be orally audible. Orally audible, is that right? You won't be able to hear a lot of that stuff. Most of that stuff. VG minus, now you're starting to get into some more sounds that are perceptible. And when you get into good plus, there'll probably be some hicks and some static, you know. And then when you get to good minus and below that, that's where the skips and the warps and the stuff that's really inaudible or beneath most people's ability to enjoy it. I don't think most people wouldn't enjoy a VG Plus record. I think most people wouldn't even notice any imperfections. And not all sellers are on equal platform in terms of grading, but that's what feedbacks and ratings are for. The number of sales a guy has. Those things are all important. You can suss out where a seller's at and how good the reputation is. And most of them will annoyingly all accept returns, which is part of why some guys don't do it anymore, because if you ain't satisfied, they have to take it back. And so you're protected in most ways. And I don't know. It's just a strange day to me, because I much prefer having an old pressing with a few static moments and a little crackle here and there than pay $60 for some new pressing that just feels sterile. And I just don't get some of the audiophile stuff. I just don't. Comparing 17 different pressings and just talking about the sound quality and not really even hearing the music, it's strange. It's strange. And that's not to say all audiophiles are that way. Shigeru Suzuki in Japan has one of the greatest hi-fi systems in the world. And I think few people hear and feel jazz as good as he does. Like, he knows his stuff. But again, there's a lot of great music out there that's not going to be in print anytime soon. And to ignore that entire 90% of the jazz canon for the small percentage of stuff that is available, and the numbers are growing. There is more stuff available now than like I said, when I was in Chicago and Milwaukee, I was surprised by how much was available, but it's still limited to bigger names, and there's a lot of artists that are just not present in that, situation at all. And a lot of times the label they were on will help also dictate how much of it's available. Blue Note's always going to have a demand for it because of the cachet. And so there's always going to be copies of that stuff out there. But I'm going to move on from that. I appreciate the people who have made the feedback. I'm not saying I'm wrong or right. I'm not saying anybody out there is right or wrong. It's just different ways and different times and different eras that I did my collecting. And some of it just surprises me, how different things have become and how different people's perspectives on collecting are. When I was doing my collecting mostly in the 90s and 2000s and early 2010s, most of my collecting friends, new releases were like something you found once in a while that were, I can't find this, or it's too expensive otherwise, or it's just so rare you can't find it, so I'm glad they're reissuing it. And now it's like, I'm only going to wait for the reissue to come out because I don't want an old copy of it. And so getting back to contemporary, I said I was going to show you some titles that I think were worthy of being issued. And I don't have an issue with any of the ones that were reissued in that latest craft series, except for maybe My Fair Lady. I think there's just too many copies of it out there. I did show the numbers of the Discog stuff that was available. And again, that's mostly from an American marketplace standpoint. If you're European in the UK, those numbers are going to look different. If you're in Japan, those numbers are going to look different. And so shipping becomes an issue. But it's all the same. None of these contemporary records are super rare in the context of collecting jazz. A lot of them are available, especially even as original or old pressings, contemporary on the OJC pressings. The Art Pepper stuff that was issued, there's obviously quite a demand for that stuff, even though I got my Art Pepper Plus 11 for probably $40 2-3 years ago. I found it in the wild in a store. The guy had 3 copies of it, actually, which, of course, that's kind of a rare thing, but Meets the Rhythm section is definitely a pretty hard record to come by. The other stuff, it's out there. If you want to dig online and find it, and I'm sure certain record stores will have it, but like my friend Ken McCall said, when he was out west, he couldn't find any of that used contemporary Pacific stuff in the record stores. It's just too sought after. But let's talk about a few records that I think were really noticeable and worthwhile. I would start right off with, to me, the biggest omission in that series is they didn't do a Howard Rumsey. And I think people are often misinformed on Rumsey, thinking he's some kind of throwback to the Dixieland era or Dixieland revival, New Orleans jazz. By no means. He's a very modern, West Coast cool bop, prolific performer, a great bass player who at Hermosa Beach, locked down the Lighthouse, this little bar, cafe, club, for Sunday jazz for quite a long stretch in the 50s. And his house group housed most of the greats of the West Coast modern scene. And a lot of the great East Coast guys came in and either guested or were members for a time, including Miles Davis sitting in, including Max Roach being a member for a long time, including the great Sonny Clark. So it wasn't just white guys, it was black cats as well. It was predominantly the West Coast cool guys. A lot of the cats that were working with Woody Herman and Stan Kenton, looking for some side work that was a little more youthful than what Kenton and Herman were doing. Not to say Kenton and Herman's bands didn't swing, because Herman's bands especially swung. And then Kenton's groups had a lot of modern, compositional, almost like Jimmy Joffrey influence, rather. They kind of get almost avant-garde at times, some of that stuff. It's really European crossover, compositionally driven. Herman's stuff's more of a kind of a straighter swing. But those players were all pretty elite players. But here's Howard Rumsey's Jazz at the Lighthouse Volume 1. For reasons unknown to me, this has a second cover. And so these are the same record. Hermosa Beach, the Lighthouse, that's a little bar there. That's in the interior. I much prefer that cover and font and look over this one. But again, listen to some of the names that appear on this record. The great Jimmy Joffrey, who was one of the innovators of the avant-garde and abstract composition. You know, even a guy like Mingus was impacted by what Jimmy Joffrey was about. The great Bob Cooper, Hampton Haws, the great pianist, Shelley Mann, Shorty Rogers, Frank Patchett, Maynard Ferguson. It's a pretty impressive list of talent that shows up on this Lighthouse Volume 1. And there's 8 volumes of Howard Rumsey in the first 70 or so contemporary. It's a little bit confusing because some of them were issued earlier on 10-inch, and they got repackaged on the 12-inch. And so some of the numbers aren't sequential. It gets a little confusing. But if you get all 8 volumes, you'll have all the 10-inch and all the 12-inch stuff. Thus, you won't need to get the 10-inch stuff if that's your choice. This is another interesting piece Howard Rumsey just wanted to show you real quick. This is on the Lighthouse Concert Series. It's on the Lighthouse label. And I think it's the only record that was on this label. It's the Howard Rumsey Group. Bob Cooper, Frank Rosolino, Stu Williams, Victor Feldman, and Stan Levy. Outstanding group here. Bob Cooper's doing the arranging. The young musicians there sitting in front of is that a Rolls Royce? Pretty fantastic. This is a pretty rare record. Don't think this has been reissued or reprinted anytime recently. So if you're looking to find another cool Howard Rumsey piece, that's one to keep an eye open. You can probably find that online or in record stores fairly affordably, I think. But Rumsey's an important cat. And I was surprised they didn't include a Howard Rumsey in that first batch. But I'm sure the name escapes me of the guy who selected the records. I'm sure he picked a few Rumseys. It's just these were what chosen. But this is also 3506, and remember 3500 is where the series starts. This is 12-tone compositions and arrangements by Lyle Murphy. Lyle Murphy's an interesting player. He also shows up on G&P label, Gene Norman Presents, on the West Coast. He does a couple interesting concerts and tone colors, he calls them, where he's using the 12-tone composition, which is somewhat similar to modal playing, if I remember. But again, it's got some interesting dissonance, interesting chords and mathematics behind it. Again, you got Buddy Collette, one of the great players and one of the great crossover artists. Collette was a pretty incredible guy. Curtis Counts is on this. Andre Previn, Abe Most, Chuck Gentry. I think, if I remember, Lyle Murphy was from Utah, which is a weird, not a jazz hotbed unless you're a basketball player. One of the great travesties for you Europeans is that the Utah Jazz were originally from New Orleans. And so they moved to Utah and they kept that name. And the Utah anti-jazz would be more apt because there's not a place less jazzy in this country than Utah. But Lyle Murphy's interesting. And if you like Mingus, if you like some edge, a little bit of composition, some interesting playing, there's some interesting instruments on this. I think there's some baritone, sax, and bass clarinet might be on this even if I remember. some interesting playing for sure. Yeah, bass clarinet, contrabass clarinet, baritone sax. So yeah, there's some interesting tones and compositions going on with that. I didn't expect it to make the first batch, but I think it's a great record though. Shelly Manne and his men. There's so much great Shelly Manne on Contemporary, and this is 3516. It's a tough call with what you're going to reissue, what you're not. But this has Charlie Mariano in the group, and for those of you who know me, they know I'm a big fan of Mariano's work in the 50s, especially his stuff with Bethlehem. So he's on this with the great Russ Freeman on the piano, who's a fantastic player. Stu Williamson's on the trumpet, who is Claude's younger brother, and is a great young fiery trumpet player who has a lot of bravado and fire, and reminds me of some of Nat Adderley at times, which is his just vitriol and just strength and dynamics. Leroy Vinegar and Shelly Manne are the bass and the drums. So that's a really great lineup. Williamson, Mariano, Freeman, Vinegar, and Shelly Manne. And so I think that record was worthy of being considered, and it probably was. You know, I guess he submitted like 25 records for submission. This is Howard Rumsey's Lighthouse All-Stars. I think this one's volume... It just says Lighthouse All-Stars. I think it's like volume 6 or 7. Again, this one's 3517, so it comes out fairly early in the sequence. And listen to the lineup on this one. Conte Condoli's on the trumpet, Bob Cooper on the sax, Richie Kamuka, the great tenor player, Stan Levy on the drums, Frank Rosalino, one of the greatest trombone players that a lot of people have forgotten about, the great Claude Williamson, Stu's brothers on the piano, Stu's on the trumpet as well, and then Bob Envoldson, who was from Montana, believe it or not, was on the trombone here. So again, that's just an incredible lineup of great talented players, and they're not playing easy listening. They're not playing schmaltzy. They're playing hard, aggressive, cool bop. You know, it's not hard bop, it's cool bop. There's not that anger in there to fuel it for it to be hard bop, but it's definitely bop. It's definitely not bebop, but it's not just modern. It's not just easy listening by any definition. Here's a great Buddy Collette, man, in many parts, 3522. I've talked about Buddy Collette quite a bit on the channel over the years. He ends up being a major contributor to Hollywood, to television and film, and becoming one of the great arrangers and producers of a lot of sounds and soundscapes in Hollywood for a couple of decades. And for a black man, that was fairly unprecedented. He really was a crossover success and made inroads into the industry that few blacks before him had ever done. So for that reason alone, he's an incredibly important figure. But his jazz work from the early to mid-50s is leading the pack. It's great stuff. He's, again, a multi-instrumentalist, plays the sax, plays the flute. I think he plays clarinet sometimes. Trying to look at the lineup here. Some great players around here. Gerald Wilson's on this. William Green, Ernie Freeman, Red Collender, Gene Wright. Just some great players, man. Larry Bunker. Several different sessions by the looks of it. Collette's a guy worth collecting. All of his stuff from that mid-50s era is out there. Again, a lot of it's not going to be available as a reissue. So if you're going to dive into contemporary and wait for stuff to be reissued, you're going to wait a long time for some of these records. Here's another Howard Rumsey, Lighthouse All-Stars, Music for Lighthouse Keeping. It's a great cover, number 3528. And look at the band on this one. Frank Rosalino on the trombone, again, one of the great. Bob Cooper on tenor, Howard Rumsey on the bass, Conte Condoli on the trumpet, Stan Levy on the drums, and the great Sonny Clark on the piano. And Sonny Clark does make his start on the West Coast before he moves east, even though I think he's from Pittsburgh originally. But he does a lot of stuff on the West Coast for a few years in the mid-late 50s before he comes back out east to Blue Note and leads the hard bop movement. So Sonny Clark alone, you know that record's going to have some serious heft to it. Some of these are kind of obvious records that will be coming. Some of them more obscure, and this is one of the more obscure ones, 3529, Jimmy Duker. He's Scottish, if I recall, and he's playing with a lot of his UK contemporaries on this. You have the names on here of Jimmy Duker, Derek Humble, Victor Feldman, Lenny Bush, Phil Seaman, Tubby Hayes, Ken Ray, some serious UK talent exists on that record, and it's got a cool UK pub scene with the little pint stein, I think it's called, on there. It's a pretty rare one with all that UK talent going on there. I was surprised this one was omitted in the first batch. It'll probably be in the second batch. This is a light session from Sonny Rollins, Way Out West. Again, beautiful old contemporary records. None of these records are super hard to find. This is with Ray Brown and Shelly Manne, and you have Rollins just floating. He's just in a real light headspace. I think sometimes a guy like Rollins really soaks up his environment and really soaks up his, like a guy like Mobley, soaks up the guys he's playing with. And it'll impact how he plays and what he has to say. Curtis Counts, the great bass player, this record definitely needed to be reissued. This is a pretty tough one to find for contemporary. He's got the great Harold Land on this. This is after Land had left Clifford Brown and Max Roach's group. He went back out west, and Land starts to get further and further out, honestly, as the 60s approach. Kind of in the shadow of almost like a Rollins and a Coltrane. Land gets some pretty interesting stuff happening. The great Jack Sheldon's on trumpet here. This is when Jack Sheldon was still a young, fiery trumpet player and not the big TV personality that he became. The great Carl Perkins is on the piano. Fantastic player with a deformed left hand, which made him use his elbow at times. Fantastic player. And Frank Butler's on the drums. One of the great kind of unheralded players of that era. Hampton Haws, Volume 3, great cover. Hampton's, of course, a great player. They did issue that one Hampton Haws record. This is with Chuck Thompson and Red Mitchell on the bass. Again, it's hard to really pick. There's so much great stuff in the contemporary label. To me, this is another one that needs to be reissued fairly promptly. This would be the Victor Feldman Sweet 16, the music of Victor Feldman. It's big band, quartet, septet. And again, there's a lot of UK guys on this, including the great Dizzy Reese, the great Tony Cromie, Tommy Pollard. Dizzy Reese alone is a great name to have. And of course, we know him from his work at Blue Note later on. Ronnie Scott, Tubby Hayes show up on some of these tracks. Again, Dizzy Reese shows up again on that session. Phil Saman. So really, it's a lot of the UK talent that contemporary on the West Coast realizes that there's some value in issuing this stuff. And really, it's contemporary and Riverside on the East Coast, or in Keep News, who's kind of issuing a lot of the UK stuff in America. This is Leroy Walks, the great Leroy Vinegar, Curtis Counts, Leroy Vinegar, Howard Rumsey. There's a lot of great bass players at Contemporary Records at this point. Red Mitchell's another. This has Gerald Wilson on it. The great Teddy Edwards from the tenor sax from the LA scene. Excuse me, Carl Perkins. And then Tony Basley's on the drums, along with Victor Feldman. So a great session, great album cover, number C3542. This is the arrival of Victor Feldman. This was Scott LaFaro and Stan Levy, and I think this is a great introduction to Victor. Great British pianist and vibraphonist. And again, you have Scott LaFaro. It might be his first recording, if memory serves me, before he goes to join Bill Evans' trio and makes quite a name for himself. And then they do this stretch of records here. This is 3549. 3550 is Grooveland, or Groove Yard. I think this has two different names, actually. Harold Land Quintet. And again, Harold Land, of course, worked, like I said, with Clifford Brown and Max Roach. This is going to be fairly aggressive, lending itself towards hard bop. You have Carl Perkins, Rolf Eriks on the trumpet, who I think was Danish, if I remember. Leroy Vinegar and Frank Butler. So it's a fairly outstanding lineup. Elmo Hope is doing the arrangements. Pretty tough record to find. The famous Watts Towers in the background that are famous LA landmarks that were built on some guy's property. He made them on his private property. They were ordered to be torn down, but they turned out to be indestructible, and so they've become landmarks. Something else, the music of Ornette Coleman, 7551. So you have that Feldman record, you have that Harold Land record, you have this record, then you have 3552, Benny Golson. So you're getting to this bit of a change here. 3554, Art Farmer. So those are all successive releases. And what's kind of different here is with Harold Land, Art Farmer, Benny Golson, Ornette Coleman, you're getting more black artists all of a sudden. And they always had a few, you know. They always had a few. Sorry. But that's a pretty impressive string of LPs in a row there in succession. You know, with the Land and the Coleman and the Benny Golson record. What a great cover that is. Golson, of course, is a Philadelphia native. Works with guys like Lee Morgan and even Coltrane in the early 50s, mid-50s. This is a great lineup with Art Farmer, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, Charlie Persip, and then also there's some other tracks here that's got Gigi Grice, Sahib Shihab, Jimmy Cleveland, and Julius Watkins. So serious New York East Coast sounds by East Coast players. Great album cover on the West Coast LA label. Even the cover, of course, is New York Harbor. Very different from some of the West Coast stuff that's going on. That's not West Coast cool in any way. Of course, Coleman is making his first 2 recordings at Contemporary, and he's about to unleash on the world his free ideations. He didn't even like the word free. The way they played, you know, free of the structures and limitations of chords and standards. Then Art Farmer, for me, is one of the great trumpet players that kind of goes under the radar. If you love Miles, if you love melancholy and beautiful, slightly milky, cloudy tonation on the trumpet, you know what I mean? It's not that crystalline clear Freddie Hubbard, Clifford Brown. It's more of a bit of a cloudy, overcast sound that they create, which creates a melancholy and a foggy, misty feeling. Farmer's a great player, along with his twin brother Addison Farmer, who's on this, and Roy Haynes is on the drums, and then the great Hank Jones is on the piano. So what a great session that is. And again, that's a fairly collectible, fairly expensive one. And then Cecil Taylor, 3562. This predates his work at Blue Note, where he gets really out. This is more him kind of on the journey to getting there. I forget who's on this record. Earl Griffith, Buell Neidlinger, and Dennis Charles. Names I don't know too much about. I only listened to that record once. I only finally found that one last year. That one gets pretty expensive and it's pretty rare. And then, of course, Curtis Counts Group, once again, Carl's Blues with Harold Land, Carl Perkins, Frank Butler, Jack Sheldon, or Gerald Wilson, and Curtis Counts. So, and I stopped there at 3574. So that's all from the first 75 releases right there. All those great titles, plus the 6 that they did already issue, which are all in that same sequence area. They don't really delve into the later numbers that come out. There's like something like Blackstone Legacy. That's also a highly sought after in-demand record that definitely needs to be reissued. But it almost doesn't feel part of this series. It could be, but it definitely is a different era and sound of jazz. I hope it gets reissued. I don't actually have Blackstone Legacy. I've heard it, but I don't have it. So that covers what I wanted to talk about in terms of the great contemporary issues. Again, why they put Andre Previn out before some of these titles. It's a bit of a mystery to me. The My Fair Lady. It's a fine record, but it's not that hard to find. You know, I mean, that's, I guess, my biggest issue with that one is like there's hundreds and hundreds of copies of that out there in the world. Record stores. You know what I mean? People will toss it in for free. It's so omnipresent. And so for that to have made that initial sequence, that's the one that really kind of sticks out to me. But it's all great stuff. Contemporary is a great label. They definitely deserve all the credit in the world. Pacific and Contemporary, both in LA, were real stalwarts of the West Coast scene and brought a lot of jazz to white America. You know, they made a lot of accessible records that sold well, that had good distribution channels. And so they got into a lot of the hinterlands, places where a Blue Note or a Prestige or a Savoy never got to. And if you look at the Savoy label out of Newark, New York centered, that label still never hasn't been really nationally distributed. There's a label that needs some good quality reissues done. Savoy Records, I would guess 80% of the ones I've bought have come from East Coast, especially into the New York, New Jersey area, Pennsylvania. You don't find them in the Midwest. You don't find them even in Chicago much. You don't find them, and there's exceptions. I've bought some from Phoenix and LA and stuff, Denver. There's stores, there's places where these records people move, but a lot of people when they move west, the records didn't make that trip with them. A lot of people do move west. That's happened for a century in this country now. The great migration of white America from the East Coast away from the black migration up to the East Coast. The whites moved out west, and a lot of them didn't take their records with them, and so all those records stayed on the East Coast. And so a label like Savoy, Blue Note, Prestige, Riverside, those New York labels, the original pressings especially are out east. And with something like Blue Note, there's been so many new editions of stuff that you don't really get that same perspective. But with Savoy, where so many of them haven't been reissued, and it's only the originals that are available, they're coming from a very geographically specific area. And I'd say the same thing about some of those Argo records. There's a lot of Argo records that have never been reissued, and you're going to get them from Chicagoland area more than you are from anywhere else in the country because that's where they came from. So that makes some sense. But even the Argo records in Chicago are getting tougher to find. Used to be you could walk into Reckless Records and find 15, 20 Argo records in there, and I think I found 3 or 4 last time, all of course, which I had. So anyway, that's Contemporary Records. Hope you all enjoyed that. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Hit that like button. Hit the bell for alerts to keep you updated with what's coming out on the channel. And if you want to support the channel, there's a Patreon and a merchandise page in the description below. Again, we appreciate you all. Y'all stay safe out there. Stay free of that corona. I don't want to have to go back into another lockdown or even the masking. It's tough for me. I've always had respiratory issues. I've always had asthma and hindered breathing. It's always been a part of my life. And the mask for me, I start to feel constricted. It starts to create an itch in my throat. It makes me cough almost every time I wear one. So I'm over there coughing like I'm some sick fucker when I'm just coughing because the mask is bothering me. It's kind of reducing my breathing capacity, and I don't like wearing them. They make me sweat, and I can kind of get over that eventually after about an hour and kind of function, but it's not something I'm very comfortable with. So anyway, y'all be safe. Talk to y'all soon. Peace.